Have you ever wondered what would happen if you decided to break all the rules? Imagine a relationship where love and desire mingle, leading a couple to explore the darkest and most passionate limits of their connection. In this story, Alejandro and Laura decide to open a door they never imagined crossing. What happens when a third party comes into play? Will they be able to handle the emotions, desire, and secrets that will emerge? Before continuing the story, I ask you for a second to give a like to the video. It doesn't bother you at all, and it helps me a lot. Let's continue. Don't miss this incredible narrative that will grab you from the first second. If you like this content, like it, comment what you would do in a situation like this, subscribe for more exciting stories, and activate the little bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Believe me, this is just the beginning, and things will get even more intense. Hit play and join us in this unique adventure of love, desire, and limits. It all started with a whisper, not in my ear, but in my mind. A desire that I never dared to confess, but that throbbed in every corner of my body when he looked at me, when he touched me. My husband, Alejandro, was everything a woman could dream of, protective, passionate, and full of love. But there was something else, something I wanted to explore. For months, that secret accompanied me in silence. In every caress, in every kiss, I imagined him, one more presence, a third to share our nights. How could I tell him, how would I tell him that my love for him was unchanging, but that my body craved something more? One night, while we were having dinner, I decided to test the waters. Alejandro, have you ever thought of trying something new? I asked with a mischievous smile, playing with my wine glass. His eyes lit up, although they also reflected curiosity. New, what do you mean? Heat crept up my neck, but I steeled myself. Something different. Get out of the routine. Maybe share our most secret fantasies. He held my gaze, his interest evident. But it was still too soon to confess everything. That night was the beginning, a spark that would start the fire. The following days were full of tension. Alejandro watched me more than usual, as if he was trying to read my thoughts. I felt it too, my skin more sensitive, my desires more latent. Finally, one night while we were in bed, he took the initiative. What fantasies are you hiding? Laura, he asked in a deep voice, stroking my arm with his fingers. My heart was pounding. This was the moment. I took a breath, and instead of answering with words, I moved closer to him. My lips found his neck, my hands his chest, and in that moment I felt his immediate reaction. I've always had an idea, something I never dared to say, I whispered to you. He tensed, expectant. I want you to tell me everything. With every word out of my mouth, his gaze darkened with a desire he could barely contain. I want us to bring someone else. A man to accompany us, just once, just to try it out. The silence was overwhelming for a moment, but her lips curved into a dangerous smile. Are you sure? He asked, caressing my face. I nodded, biting my lip. In that instant, I knew I had planted the seed, and that desire would begin to grow. Alejandro didn't say much after my confession. His reaction was more physical than verbal. That night he loved me as if he wanted to prove to me that no one else could make me feel that way. But I knew there were questions, doubts, and perhaps a little resistance in his mind. The next morning, as we ate breakfast, the silence between us was different. It wasn't awkward, but charged with something new, something electric. Finally, it was he who broke the ice. Do you really want it? He asked without looking away from his coffee cup. Yes, I answered sincerely, although my voice trembled slightly, but only if you want it too. His gaze pierced me, and I could see a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. It's unusual, but I'm not going to lie. There's something about the idea that intrigues me. I felt an unexpected relief, but also a fire inside me. My body responded to simply hearing his words. I knew this conversation was just the beginning, but the seed was already germinating. That night, as we were going to bed, I decided to take the conversation further. What do you imagine it would be like? I asked in a whisper, my hand running down his bare chest. I don't know, she replied, but her breathing quickened slightly. Maybe you should tell me how you imagine it. I closed my eyes and let my imagination take over. I imagine a quiet night, a glass of wine, and someone else. Someone who is only there to please us, who has no other purpose than to make this experience unforgettable. He stared at me. His hand slowly descended around my waist, as if my words had ignited something in him. "So, should we start looking for someone?" he asked with a crooked smile. My heart skipped a beat. We were entering uncharted territory, but the desire I felt was stronger than any fear. Deciding how to take the next step was more complicated than I expected. Alejandro and I were not the kind of people who would share our intimate lives easily, but curiosity and desire guided us. One night, while sharing a bottle of wine, the conversation became more explicit. "And how do you imagine he would be?" Alejandro asked, looking at me with an intensity that took my breath away. I took a moment to respond, fiddling with the glass between my fingers. "Someone confident, but discreet. Attractive, but not overwhelming. Someone who understands that this is ours and is only here to complete the fantasy." Alejandro smiled, leaning toward me. "You seem to have thought this through." My cheeks caught fire, but I didn't deny anything. Maybe his lips found mine, but this time the kiss was different, charged with a new, wilder energy. The tension between us was almost unbearable, and at that moment I knew he was as excited as I was. Finally, he whispered in my ear, "Then let's do it, Laura. Find that person. I'm ready to see how far we can go." My legs trembled at those words. The game had begun, and there was no turning back. With the decision made, the search began. It wasn't easy, but Alejandro and I enjoyed every little step. The conversations became more explicit, our nights more passionate. It was as if the very idea of what we were about to do to each other had transformed. One night, while browsing a discreet dating site, I came across a profile that captured my attention. His name was Daniel. Tall, with an intense gaze and a smile that promised danger. Without much thought, I sent him a message, describing exactly what we were looking for. Hours later, as Alejandro and I cuddled in bed, his reply came. "Is that him?" Alejandro asked, seeing the expression on my face. I showed him the conversation, and his eyes sparkled with a mixture of surprise and desire. "He's got something interesting," he murmured, running a finger along my collarbone. I felt a shiver. Daniel agreed to meet us in a neutral place to talk. My body burned with anticipation. We arrived to save a Friday night. The dim lighting and soft music created the perfect ambience. Alejandro and I sat in a strategic corner watching the door. When Daniel arrived, everything seemed to stop. He was even more attractive in person, sure, but not arrogant. As he approached, he gave us a smile that took my breath away. "Nice to meet you," he said, shaking Alejandro's hand and then mine. His gaze lingered on mine a second longer than necessary, and I felt a tingle run down my spine. The conversation was natural, but loaded with innuendo. Daniel had a deep voice, with a seductive tone that made my imagination fly. Every time he spoke, I felt Alejandro's gaze on me, assessing my reactions, absorbing every detail. When we said goodbye that night, Alejandro took me by the hand. As we arrived home, he ruined me against the wall. "You like it, don't you?" he whispered, his voice heavy with desire. I couldn't lie. "Yes, but not as much as you do." That night we made love with an intensity we hadn't experienced in years. The fantasy was coming to life, and we were both surrendered to it. The next encounter was more intimate. We invited Daniel to our house, under the excuse of getting to know each other. While I was preparing dinner, I felt his gaze on me, evaluating me, desiring me. Alejandro did not take his eyes off us, and his presence made me feel even more powerful. After dinner, the mood changed. Words were replaced by glances, distances shortened. Daniel slowly moved closer, brushing my hand with his. My breathing quickened. Alejandro was behind me, watching my every move. "She's safe," Alejandro whispered in my ear, his breath warm on my neck. I didn't respond with words. My body was the answer, leaning into him as my eyes searched Daniel's. Everything became more intense, more charged. Alejandro took control, guiding every step, making sure I was comfortable, but also on edge. The first caresses were tentative, but full of electricity. Daniel was in front of me, his fingers running down my arm slowly. Alejandro, behind, held my waist, his lips exploring my neck. It was a dangerous game, but also addictive. The air was charged, and every movement seemed synchronized. Daniel and Alejandro seemed to understand each other without words, both focused on me. I was the center of a whirlwind of desire, and I couldn't resist. "You're beautiful," Daniel murmured, leaning closer. Alexander grunted in approval, but his grip tightened. His presence reminded me that even though there was a third, he was still my anchor, my everything. That night was just the beginning of something much deeper, more intense. We had waited weeks for this moment. Alejandro had prepared everything: soft lights, soft music, and a bottle of red wine that filled the air with an intoxicating aroma. Daniel arrived on time, his presence filling the atmosphere with a mixture of security and mystery. We were sitting on the couch, too close, but not yet breaking that last barrier. Alejandro took the initiative, raising his glass and toasting. To us, to discovering something new together. Our gazes met, and something changed. It was Alejandro who kissed me first, slow and deep, while Daniel watched. I felt the heat of his gaze on my skin, and when Alejandro pulled away, Daniel took his place. He was different, his lips soft but firm, exploring mine with a restrained hunger. Alejandro didn't pull away; instead, his hands rested on my shoulders, guiding me between them. That night, the barriers disappeared. Desire enveloped us, and our bodies spoke in a language neither of us knew, but we understood perfectly. My senses were on edge. The lights grew dimmer, and every caress, every glance, felt amplified. Alejandro stood behind me, his hands firm on my waist, while Daniel stood in front of me, his fingers tracing paths on my skin. "Trust us," Alejandro whispered in my ear, his gravelly voice sending a shiver down my spine. I did. I closed my eyes and let his hands and lips guide me. Every movement was a promise fulfilled, every whisper an invitation to surrender completely to the moment. Time seemed to stand still. There was nothing but the three of us, uniting our desires in a perfect choreography. I felt free, powerful, as if the whole world existed just for this moment. Want to know how this unforgettable night continues? Read on to discover how boundaries fade away and desire transforms into an unforgettable connection. The next morning, the world seemed different. Alejandro and I were tangled between the sheets, while Daniel had left with impeccable discretion. My thoughts were jumbled, mixing the euphoria of the night before with questions I had never considered. "Are you okay?" Alejandro asked, stroking my hair. "Yes, I think so," I answered, though I wasn't sure what I really felt. He kissed me softly, his gaze calm but questioning. "You don't have to worry. This is just us." Those words comforted me. I knew our relationship was stronger than ever. What we had shared would not separate us, but bring us even closer. As the days passed, I couldn't stop thinking about what we had experienced. My senses were still alert, as if my body had awakened to something I didn't know it needed. Alejandro and I talked more openly than ever. The barriers were gone, and our nights were filled with laughter, confessions, and renewed passion. However, we could not ignore the fact that Daniel had become a constant presence in our lives. Another night, we invited him over again, and this time everything flowed more naturally. The nerves were gone, and what remained was pure connection. My lips sought his with the same intensity with which he found Alejandro, creating a unique and deeply intimate dynamic. The third time we met Daniel, the experience was even more intense. We were now three people completely devoted, exploring the limits of what desire meant. But questions also began to arise. How far were we willing to go? What did this mean for Alejandro and me as a couple? The conversations after each encounter grew deeper. Alejandro surprised me more and more each day with his ability to open up, to explore with me. And I, in his arms, felt like I was discovering a new version of myself. The night was charged with electricity. Alejandro and I were waiting for Daniel, and the anticipation was almost unbearable. I moved around the living room, feeling his gaze following me. Alejandro was sitting on the couch relaxed, but his eyes glittered with restrained desire. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, his deep voice filling the space. "Just tonight," I replied, playing with the light fabric of my dress. Before I could answer, the door opened. Daniel walked in with that innate confidence that took my breath away. His presence filled the air, and my legs trembled slightly at the sight of him. The three of us sat down, but this time, the words were brief. There was a tacit understanding of what we were looking for. Alejandro took the initiative, as always, standing behind me, while Daniel was in front of me. "Today, it's all about you," Laura murmured Alejandro, his hands running down my arms slowly. His words ignited something inside me. I felt Daniel move closer, his fingers brushing my cheek as he looked into my eyes, as if he wanted to read my every thought. The moment was pure fire, a dance between three synchronized bodies, moving to the beat of a desire that seemed infinite. The sensations were mixed, and each caress, each whisper, was like a new secret revealed. The days after that night were different. Alejandro and I could not keep our hands off each other. Each time we were together, the intensity seemed to have increased. Daniel was still a constant presence, but something deeper was blossoming between the two of us. "I never thought something like this could make us so strong," Alejandro said one night, as I rested on his chest. I didn't respond by caressing his skin either. "But I feel this has made us stronger, more connected." He looked at me with a knowing smile. "And we are just getting started." His words promised more adventures, more moments when the world would disappear and only the three of us would be left. Alejandro suggested a change of scenery, to take our connection to a different place. We ended up in a luxury hotel, where every detail seemed designed for desire. The room was filled with candles, and the scent of the intense floated in the air. Alejandro and Daniel had carefully prepared everything, and when they took me to the center of the room, I felt the control slipping out of my hands. "Today, just enjoy," Daniel said, in a soft voice, as Alejandro kissed me from behind. It was as if each one knew exactly what I needed. The lights threw on our skins, and the atmosphere was filled with soft laughter, sighs and caresses that seemed to have no end. It was a forbidden pleasure, but also perfectly ours. Emotions began to mix with desire. Each encounter was not only physical, but also emotional. Alejandro and Daniel understood each other in a surprising way, as if they shared a mission, to make me feel desired, loved and completely free. One night, after another intense moment between the three of us, Alejandro took my hand and pulled me aside. "This is not just a game, Laura. This is our way of celebrating who we are." His words took my breath away. I looked at him, feeling the love in his eyes, and I knew that, although this had started as a fantasy, it had become something much bigger. Over time, Daniel began to occupy a more definite place in our lives. He was not only a third party in our nights, but also someone with whom we shared more everyday moments. But Alejandro always made sure that our connection as a couple remained intact. One night, as Daniel was saying goodbye, Alejandro hugged me from behind. "Are you still happy about this?" he asked, his voice low and calm. I turned to him, wrapping my arms around his neck. "Happier than ever. This has given us something I never thought we could have." He smiled, leaning down to kiss me. "Then let's keep exploring together." That night, Alejandro and I decided that the next experience should be different. We wanted something wilder, more daring. The place we chose was a private club, known only to those seeking to explore their most hidden fantasies. Entering there was like crossing a threshold into another world. The lights were low, and the soft music set a hypnotic rhythm. Alejandro took my hand, his firmness reassuring me as my heart pounded. Daniel was not expected in the corner, his magnetic presence drawing stares. When our eyes met, a smile came across his face. It was as if he knew tonight would be different for all of us. We sat on a large sofa, surrounded by curtains that created an intimate atmosphere. Alejandro, as always, took control, initiating with a kiss that took my breath away. I felt Daniel's gaze on us, his desire palpable in the air. "Today, I want to see you through," Alejandro whispered, his lips brushing my ear. His words ignited something inside me. Daniel slowly moved closer, his fingers touching my face with unexpected tenderness. My body responded to his caresses, while Alejandro held me, watching me in this game of pleasure and trust. It was a whirlwind of sensations, Alejandro's firmness, Daniel's softness, and the combination of the two taking me to a place where everything felt possible. The last night together was like a crescendo, the climax of everything we had built. We decided to return to the hotel where it all began, but this time with more careful planning. The room was decorated with candles, rose petals, and a soft melody that enveloped the atmosphere. Alejandro guided me to the center of the room, his hands firm but full of tenderness. Daniel was nearby, his presence intensifying every moment. "Today, I want you to surrender completely," Alejandro said, his voice low and gravelly. I did. I closed my eyes and let them take control. Alejandro and Daniel worked in perfect harmony, each movement designed to take me to the limit. Their caresses mingled, their whispers echoed in my mind, and each second was more intense than the last. I felt the world fade away. There was no room for fear or doubt, only for the desire that united us. On that night, I understood that the trust we shared was at the core of everything, allowing us to explore without reservation and create something unique. When we finally rested, the air was thick with contentment and connection. Alejandro hugged me, his breath warm on my neck, while Daniel stood beside us, sharing the tranquility of a perfect moment. "This is not just a game," Alejandro said, his voice soft but sure. "This is our way of loving each other." After that last night, our lives went back to routine, but something had changed. Alejandro and I were stronger, more connected, and Daniel would always be part of our story. The menage was not only a fantasy fulfilled, but a catalyst to rediscover ourselves as a couple, to explore what it really meant to love and trust each other. And you, would you dare to explore the limits of your desires? Because sometimes, when you cross those boundaries, you find something much deeper than you imagined.